Okay, welcome back, Joe. Good to see you. This is your third time
I think
that you've been on
so.
the show.
Yeah, I believe
Yeah.
so.
And we keep on circling on the same topic, and I kind of wanted you to come on and talk about the same thing again. But we're going to do something different today, but it might all circle back to attachment. Uh, Start off by I asked you about what your genius is, what you are talented at, what you're skilled at, what comes naturally to you that may also kind of trip you up sometimes. What's your genius,
Yeah.
Joe?
Well, I mean, I have this desire to talk about my academic achievements and all that, but
Hmm.
I really feel like when I'm fully in flow and have energy, it involves other people and my ability to connect with and I guess gain strength and strengthen other people. So somehow, I don't know if genius can be directed that way. Is that like if I'm involved with this coaching my uh, kids team or involved with you or with all of us trying to figure out how we can improve the human condition together. I'm tempted to say my genius is the problem solving cognitive part, but I actually think it's the part that involves connecting with others. I'm not quite sure how to express that.
That sounds like a good expression to me that your genius is in connecting with others, collaborating. I've definitely
Yeah.
experienced that and I've seen that in you. And actually, I have ideas around where that becomes your problem. But
Yeah.
before we
Does.
get there, I was working, I finally looked up the definition of genius, like the origins of the definition. I hadn't looked it up before. And we all think about it. We think about genius as
Yeah.
intellectual capacity. We think about Einstein, right? But the definition, the origin of the word goes back to the Romans, and geniuses were spirits
Yeah.
that would travel to communities or clans or families and offer them protection.
Oh,
So
nice.
they were like this like spirit energy, and then it eventually became a genius with something sort of a spirit within you that offers you protection, and then it became this intellectual, exceptional intellectual abilities.
That's a really
So it does,
interesting
yeah,
evolution. I mean, because that
yeah.
initial metaphor, it's like it's a protector or somebody who
Hmm.
it's similar to what I'm saying about community and maybe even love, that kind of spirit that goes out and protects and keeps people safe.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So your genius is this uh, love, you said, loving people, collaborating with people.
Yeah, I don't want to say love because I know it sounds sentimental and very hippie, and I want to be, not, I want to be cool. I don't want to be too hippie. I guess hippie is cool for some groups, but it's not cool. It's sentimental. I don't want to be sentimental. So,
Like Hallmark card.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So when
Yeah.
I talk about unconditional love, I don't want to say in a way that doesn't recognize that there's evil in the world, that there are people who are selfish or that would harm you, that there are people who will betray you. So what I'm trying to talk about is love that is tempered by wisdom and discernment. You know, and how do we do that? How do we keep that energy of love when we live in a world that has so much cruelty and meanness and dishonesty? So that's the fundamental life problem that I face when it comes to my energy.
Yeah. So what what throws it off track then? Like how does that energy get misused or underused or overused or yeah.
Well, it is going to return to attachment, but so how do we maintain our love for people and for the world when we experience betrayal or cruelty or just selfishness? And I think it comes down to being able to let go of certain things, like being able to let go of an idealized version of others, so that people, you know, if you thought somebody loved you and they were kind to you and they cared about you, and then they do something that's quite cruel, it would be easy to become really bitter and resentful and let that spin around and just swallow up your love like a black hole. It just could be that anger, that energy could just swallow up that positive energy because you are attached to an outcome that people treat you fairly and decently all the time, and act like friends all the time. If you can let go of the attachment to that idea, then I think it allows you to retain that love without spinning off into that bitterness cycle. I think
Mhm.
that you just have to let go of the idea of people being perfect, that people will like you all the time. Um, you got to expect when bad things happen not to be devastated because you're not attached to that outcome. So I think that's at the heart of it. Um, that allows you to stay outside of bitterness and hate. For me, that's a difficult life task because we're constantly attached to, that's unfair. That shouldn't have happened. People shouldn't have treated me that way. This is wrong. This is unfair. We're attached to a lot of ideas about life,
Mhm.
and we're not seeing life as it is and accepting it.
Mhm. Yeah, it has a lot to do with, uh, the expectations that we put on people, right? And when I was just doing this workshop with Robin Walzer and, Steve Hayes and Miranda Morris, and Robin has this whole segment on destroying your hopes and dreams. She's like anti-hope. She's really anti-hope. And whatever your hopes and dreams are, whatever your expectations are, destroy them
Yeah,
right now because they're part of sort of part of the problem. That when you have these expectations of people, and it's not even that I would say with love, it's not even that when they like are horrible to you, sometimes they just don't live up to your
yeah,
expectation. Even
exactly.
as a therapist, like when I have clients that idealize me in some way and then they see, oh no, I have all sorts of flaws and I miss an appointment or I say the wrong thing
Yeah,
or whatever. The fall is so great
yeah,
when you have high expectations for
yes.
people and it interferes with maybe that kind of love that we want to have, the unconditional love.
Exactly. And this is the trickiest part for me, to have that unconditional love, to keep renewing that because things keep happening in life. As long as you're alive, people are going to betray, people are going to do the wrong thing, people are not going to live up to expectations, people are going to act selfishly. It is this idea that how do you, I guess one way of trying to understand it is this, the story of the frog and the scorpion.
No, is this a Buddhist story?
It's not a Buddhist story. It's
No,
Aesop's fables, I
terrible.
think.
Beth Babel. Yeah. Uh
Yeah.
huh.
Well, there's a frog. I'm going to tell it badly, but there's a frog about to swim across a lake, and there's a scorpion who says, "Can you give me a ride across the lake?" And the frog says, "I don't want to do that because you're my enemy. You would sting me." The scorpion said, "No, I won't. No, I promise. Because if I sting you, we'll both go down." And so the frog says, "Okay, I agree." And so the scorpion hops on the frog's back, and it starts to swim across the lake. And when it gets to the middle, the scorpion stings the frog, and the frog starts to die,
Horrible.
and they both go down. They both die.
Uh-huh.
But before the frog dies, it says, "Why did you do that?" And the scorpion, this is the fable, says, it was in my nature.
Yeah.
And I think that is the hardest. That's probably my initial reaction when I started talking about love, was that sense of wanting to be tough and the vulnerability that it brings, right? So I didn't mean cool or hippie. When I use words like that, what I really mean is I'm afraid of not being tough. If you wanted to summarize it, now I'm kind of figuring it out because you always act as my therapist, Diana, even if you didn't plan to. Um, and when you say unconditional love, you're asking people. You're not asking, but to do that, you have to be vulnerable. To do that, you have to risk everything: your reputation, your feelings, disappointment. And so that, combined with non-attachment, where you're able to kind of be disappointed, to kind of be willing to have those lows, that you don't have to protect yourself and stay small and stay out of danger by, you know, not showing yourself, not putting love out there. You're safer, right?
Mhm.
But that's kind of an attachment to that
Mhm.
safety, to people not hurting you. And yeah, so there's vulnerability in love, and that's the part that I guess I have to work on a lot.
Okay, I'm gonna make you more vulnerable. Sorry.
Oh dear.
Do I have permission to disclose a little
Sure,
bit of a
go
WhatsApp
crazy, go crazy.
that back and forth? I can go. Okay, so I was reaching out to you to get slides the night before, or it was maybe it was your morning, my night. And we just had like a little bit of an exchange around this.
Did we?
And it was, yeah, yeah, around the vulnerability of loving a child.
Oh yes, yes.
Um, and not that you don't need to talk about your child because that's private, right? But you can the vulnerability of loving a child and loving a partner. So this can show up with
Mm,
our like, how do
yeah.
you love an enemy? But then there's also, I'm wondering about that genius energy for you in terms of, does it get overly clingy
Mm.
and attached? And you said this is the source of my suffering.
Well,
Is
what there's several. There
love.
would be several.
Yeah.
One is my attachment to being liked. It's very dangerous.
Oh,
So when people dislike me or disapprove of me, I uh, even when that might be a signal to me that that person isn't necessarily have my best interest. I go out of my way to get their approval anyway. So that's one of those
yeah,
attachments that could, you know, turns it love into worry and me spending energy on people who aren't necessarily there for me. So
yeah.
that's a weakness. The other one is I really don't like feeling vulnerable. And that's why when we started this talk, I started talking about how love seemed an uncool topic and sentimental because it seemed like it was about vulnerability. And so I am attached to not being, I guess, embarrassed or stood over or put down or, cut down by people. I don't want to take that risk. So
Okay. So then how does that show up career-wise for you?
uh, I'm pretty good
What
with
does
my
that
career, actually. I've surrounded myself now. Maybe early on I was much worse. I would put up with a lot of these kinds of sniper behavior where people would make little jokes about me and I would just laugh along because I wanted them to like me. And it was actually my wife, Anne, who coached me when I would describe what I was doing. She saw it and I didn't. That's why it's a blind spot. You don't see it, other people do. I learned when people were doing that, being a sniper, kind of putting me down in a kind of, this is just a joke,
Mhm.
we're just having fun here, but it was putting me down, that I would stop laughing along and I would start to kind of just sit in the silence and not respond to
Mm.
it. And that stopped people from doing it.
Well, it makes them uncomfortable for sure.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I've done a pretty good job of surrounding myself with people who understand this and don't do that, I guess. So that's the
Mhm.
discernment part. I still have love, but I do want to know what the difference is between a scorpion and a frog. There's no reason to. I don't hate the scorpion, but I don't want to put it on my back either.
Mhm.
And so it, it's really about discernment. A lot of your work is really brilliant on this. Your idea of wisdom. That's crucial for love because unconditional love sounds like you would just be out there making yourself vulnerable and harmed by everybody, being a doormat. It does not mean that. It has to be combined with understanding. Understanding and love have to go together. But the non-attachment part is that when you understand, okay, this scorpion is going to harm me, you don't get resentful or angry at that either, because that's in the nature of life. That's just be careful around the scorpion, and then you
Mhm.
can keep your love. And then you might even do something like just be a really kind, considerate person, do everything you consider value consistent, and then that person still does the wrong thing. It is about letting go of the outcome. Like being unconditionally loving means putting love out there and letting go of the outcome of how people respond to you when that happens and being able to keep
Mhm.
doing that. So it's tough. It's a life's mission, but the energy you feel when you do that, when you have that unconditional love, it's just like, I don't know, you'd probably good at describing it, but it's just so much more freeing and open and vital than the kind of resentment, bitterness, the kind of alternative, the difference between like a star that shines and bright and heats and provides light versus a black hole where everything's all that energy is just being sucked in and into itself and being compressed into a single, separate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this can happen with people you know, but it can also happen with strangers.
Mm.
I mentioned I was on an airplane yesterday, and it was one of those terrible situations where you're on the airplane, you're on the, about to take off, and then all of a sudden the pilot says, "We're going to be here for a little bit. We're figuring something out."
Yeah.
And then it's like an hour later and the air conditioning goes off.
Oh no.
Hour later, the power starts to shut down. And um but the whole time I was sitting next to this guy and we were like crammed in, and I was sitting next to this guy, and I have found that when you're in whatever situation you're in, make friends with your neighbor. Like that is make
That's
some unconditional love with your neighbor
that's a
with your
good
neighbor.
idea. That's
And
tough. That's tough.
well, it's tough, but it will pay off.
Mm.
So I was already making friends with him, and uh and I started to make really good friends with him as we were there for 2 hours. He was a city planner in Phoenix and worked for the army. I did not ask about anything in terms of who's voting for who or any of that kind of stuff. But then I find out that he's also like a vegan and whatever, super interesting guy. They end up kicking us off the plane,
Oh.
and we had another whatever 3 hours to wait in the airport, and he gets me into the lounge.
Oh
And I
wow.
got to go, "Have you been in the airport lounge?"
I have a
Like
couple
a
of
whole other
times.
life.
It's a very different experience indeed.
Fantastic. Yeah, lots of free food, lots of space. Anyway,
The
but
benefits of love, the benefits of love.
benefits of love, and you don't you're not doing it for something.
Yeah.
You're doing it and because it makes those 2 hours in the airplane a lot better, or the 20 years of marriage a lot better, or the 10 years that you're in your
Yeah.
career, your coworkers that you can't get rid of. It just makes it all, you're right, energy, but also more ease, if you just let it flow
Yeah.
and you're not resisting people.
Love does come back as long as you're not attached to the outcome of getting love back. Putting love into the world does come back. Can I give you a quote by Martin Luther King, which I think just captures this really well? It captures what you're saying.
Mhm.
Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So it's kind of what you're talking about in terms of the outcome of being that unconditional love, that kindness is often surprising, and it does come back. There is some karma, but it's not one to one, and that's the non-attachment part. You don't know. That's the unconditional part. You don't know if it's going to come back. Uh, it may not. People may exploit you. So that's the vulnerability part. So it's all attachment,
Mhm.
vulnerability, and love are all intermixed.
Yeah. Yeah, I get hooked by the liking, wanting to be the wanting,
Yeah,
wanting to be, wanting to be liked, wanting to be approved of, and, I get really cravey about that.
yeah, yeah,
In some settings, not, I don't get into it in, like, my romantic relationship. I'm like, "Ah, bad mood, whatever, I know you love me." It feels very unconditional. My
yeah.
kids, "Oh, you're saying I hate you, mom, but I'm cool with that because I know you love me."
Mm.
So, in those settings, my best friends, I don't have clinginess, but I get the clingy for love in, really in my work settings, not with my
Yeah,
clients, but in the academic stuff. And I'm curious, maybe we can talk a little bit about that, like how unconditional love, that sort of contrast between clingy love, attached love versus unconditional. What's the difference?
yeah. The clingy love means that it's conditional, right? It depends on the other person. And there's a lot of really nice metaphors in like Buddhism and stuff for this kind of thing. The opposite, like non-attachment. So it's like that metaphor of the lotus flower growing in the muddy water, but remaining unstained by the mud. But when you cling, when you kind of want the outcome of respect, people to like me, people to treat
Ooh,
me well,
yes, I want
then
it.
and you see this as people of this when that doesn't happen, and it won't happen, then you start to get anger, resentment, bitterness. And this is stuff that can cycle in people for days, months, years. I mean, I don't know if you've, gone back to a high school reunion and seen people whose joy has left them, whose love and playfulness is gone. They're not like how you remember they were in high school, that there was something, that gradual bitterness, anger, the resentment at not getting what they wanted in life, and not having people respect them as much as they wanted in life, kind of just eats away at them. And then you see them 20 years later and they're not that person that they once were. And that's the corrupting influence of that clingy, attached kind of love, is that each time people disappoint you or do something wrong, you become entangled with it. You're not like that lotus flower that's remaining pure in the mud. You become,
Mhm.
I don't know how to describe it, a metaphor for how it starts to kind of, you get entangled in the very negative thing that you'd like to be free from, and it becomes more and more part of you until it
So can
corrupts
I
you.
add can I add to that? Because I feel, um, that in your so I'm reading the paper that you're working on or that we are working on around attachment, and in it, you're talking about craving and substances and how there's the wanting aspects of the
Yeah,
substance, like, "Gosh, I could really use a drink right now." And then there's the liking
yeah,
aspect of the substance, which is like, "Oh, it feels good to drink right
yeah,
now." And sometimes you can have the wanting without the liking.
yeah,
And I've experienced that in terms of the craving associated with wanting to be appreciated, or for me, that really shows up as wanting to be acknowledged and
yeah,
appreciated.
yeah,
This showed up for me in the boot camp.
yeah,
I wanna
yeah,
be acknowledged and appreciated for my hard work
absolutely.
as opposed to being in the, "Wow," like, we all contributed to something really beautiful. It was a
Yeah,
beautiful experience. People had a fantastic time, but I had that clinginess.
yeah,
And it and then when you actually do get the appreciation because you're begging for it or grabbing at it or poking at it,
yeah,
it doesn't actually satisfy. It doesn't you don't
exactly.
like it, you
Yeah,
know? They're like, "Oh, but you didn't really give it to me the way I wanted it." So,
exactly.
wanting versus liking. Let's
Yeah,
let's talk a little bit about that.
that's a
Yeah.
fascinating thing. They used to think that the two went together, that you wanted what you
Yeah.
liked, but it's that the wanting system is a completely different system. It's a drive system, like dopamine driven. And you talked about addictions where people, well, let's talk about shop, like materialism and buying things. People typically have a strong drive. They want something, and are very frequently disappointed when they actually have it. So that's a well-established pattern in the literature, that you know that drive to want can go up, 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 up without liking going up, and sometimes liking could go down. So it's the same thing with um, any kind of compulsion, like workaholism. You can have this massive drive, urgency to kind of move up the ladder, climb the ladder, be higher status, but you don't like it, you don't enjoy it. So there can be this disconnect. And the same thing with getting people's approval. It's like, if that's really your drive and you're pursuing it, you may fail to notice that you get really good at it. So you and I are good at making people like us. We've gotten good. I mean, I had a
High
narcissist.
five to that.
Yeah,
It's a really terrible position to be
I
in.
know. uh, and then but if you do get it, it's like, oh, well, I don't really want to hang out with this person anyway, because I had to do all
Mhm,
this stuff to get them to like me, and I
mhm,
wasn't authentic, and you know that's disappointing. And a lot of addictions have this feature: internet addiction, social media addiction. So we might get addicted to chasing likes and getting our YouTube channel or whatever to be super popular, and we crave it more and more. But it doesn't bring enjoyment, but it doesn't stop us from having that drive system hyperactivated, getting reinforced every time we see the likes, and basically getting more and more caught up in this symbolic world of likes. While in the
mhm.
physical world, we're not actually interacting with humans who we actually like. So it's
Right.
like we're becoming insensitive to the physical world of liking and connection and eye contact, and we're getting caught up in the symbolic world of virtual likes. And,
Right.
I don't know if the newest generation will socialize the way we socialize, because I remember when we socialized, we could speak slowly. I could start a story with you, Diana, and I could speak at this pace.
Mhm.
And you'd wait for
Yeah,
me
I'm
to,
worried that we're too slow, Joe. I'm worried. I'm worried that this is going too slow.
yeah,
How's
yeah,
the audience take this? Yeah.
exactly. But with kids, like they, first of all, they don't make that fully present eye contact, I think, as much as we would have.
Yeah.
They're not fully present because they interact with their phones. So it's not
Mhm.
necessarily a bad thing. I don't know, but I just wonder if we're getting, the way that the modern world is designed to deliver and activate drive. Drive
Yeah.
is the thing that gets you to click. It's the thing that gets you to watch and gets you to buy. It's not
Yeah.
liking, it's drive and dopamine. I just
Yeah.
wonder if the the technological world we live in is not increasing the extent that we're attached to these experiences rather than being connected to life.
Right. So that wanting system is getting overstimulated and almost like that becomes the norm. That I mean,
Yeah,
I could see that. If you get used to that, used to the wanting system and maybe not having as much contact with the liking system, which
yeah,
is more, kind of feeling contentment and it's a little bit it's just a different feeling state.
yeah.
Uh,
It's like drive, drive, drive,
yeah.
drive, fast, fast, fast. Everybody has too much to do. We got to do it. You're asking me how
Yeah.
they're doing. Oh, how many times I say, I'm just too busy. I'm overwhelmed. Everybody says that.
Yeah.
Everybody
Yeah.
says that.
I know.
And
Yeah.
if you read like a book like To Kill a Mockingbird, which is set in the South, 1950s or 60s, I can't remember when, but the slow pace, the kind of
Yeah.
slow way of talking that I experienced in a country town in Tennessee when I was a kid, where people would start a story and there'd only be like, they just start and be huge pauses, and you just sit there and wait for the story to be told, and that was okay. And now I have to say to my son, Vincent, I need to talk to you. It's only going to take a minute. So I'm going to take 60 seconds. I want you to totally put down everything, listen to me fully for 60 seconds.
Yeah.
Like, you have to give the timer. You have to put a timer up there.
That's your son. So I had a client that I referred, I interviewed um Stephen Batchelor. You know who Stephen Batchelor is? He's like this like super well-known Buddhist scholar. He like translates the original Buddhist texts. He's
Yeah.
he's in the Buddhist world, he's huge. So I interviewed him, he's a former monk. I interviewed him and he has this great concept of the four tasks, which he is arguing that the four tasks actually came before the Four Noble Truths,
Oh,
and they're
really?
actually the essence of that. The essence of that
Cool.
original teaching is these four tasks, and the Four Noble Truths actually aren't. It's not about that. Anyway, so fascinating interview, and I sent it to
Wait a
a
minute. What are the
client
four
thinking,
tests, Diane? You can't just say, here's something more
"You
important
have
than
to
the
go
Four
through the
Noble
interview."
Truths.
This is
Oh.
I'm plugging myself right now.
All right, now I have to go listen.
I'll
I'm
link to
ready
it.
to write it down here. I'm like, oh my gosh, four tasks. Please tell me what they
Well,
are.
I'll tell you what this client didn't do in these four tasks. So I gave this to him thinking this would be very good for him because one of the well, you'll find out what the four tasks are. But he put my interview into this new like Google LM, into Google LM. It's a 45-minute interview. He put it or 30 minutes, whatever. He put it into Google LM and told them to turn it into a 7-minute podcast
Oh, wow.
with two podcasts with a host and a guest. And then he sent it back to me, and it was these two computerized voices that were acting as if, it was a podcast describing the whole interview in 7 minutes.
Wow.
And he was so excited because he got the four tasks and he got the whole thing. And I listened to it and
Wow.
my skin was crawling. My skin was crawling because on the one hand, yes, he got it. But what he didn't get was the experience of listening to me and this Buddhist monk. We happened to
Oh,
be at a
I see what you're
um,
saying.
in
Ah,
France outside. There was like
yeah.
silences and, silly little things that happened and all of
Oh,
just that sort of like
wow.
the liking aspect of it. But we
Yeah.
got the one I got like you wanted those four tasks, didn't
Yeah,
you?
that was very good. You just denied me my drive. Absolutely. Just give it to me fast. Pop, 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 pop.
The drive. And so his drive
Ah, that's a
for the
nice
four tasks,
example. Yeah.
he got 7 minutes of that. but he didn't get the liking experience of hearing two people having a conversation.
Yeah.
And so that part, like, if we think about love too, I mean, we can totally go into like drive versus liking and love. We can
Yeah.
talk about long-term marriage,
Yeah.
you know, drive that goes into liking, and how we, in some ways, we don't, we've lost that capacity to be in that unconditional. Maybe all this speed is contributing to it.
The speed, the drive system is very fast, rapid. Anything that's not linked to the drive is irritating. So you'll probably notice this
Mhm.
in your own kids. They get quite irritated by you if they are on their device and you want to talk to them. Like when I was
Yeah.
growing up, I would have killed to have my dad talk to me. I mean, it would have been fantastic for him to sit there and say, "How was your day?" But now I'm
Your
just
dad's
like an
paying attention to you.
irritant. I'm
Wow.
just pulling away from YouTube or
Yeah.
something. I'm like, like,
You
damn.
don't make me sound old when you say when I was growing up. That's sort of something I try and avoid to say. When I was a youngster. But yeah, no, that there, but I think it goes both ways. I mean, I think I'm plugging in here. I think we also have we all have irritation when people interfere with our drive,
Yeah,
when we're doing something. Even if the person that's interfering with what you're doing is more important than anything that you're doing.
yeah. So maybe this one of the skills I think, in every generation, there's always going to be like that top 10% who, despite all the problems with the generation, all the biases, all the things that pull you down, that 10% will succeed, you know. Um, so
Hmm.
maybe the successful ones in this generation will learn how to move between the drive system and that more soothing, calm social system. That it seems to
Mhm.
me, I don't want to characterize it as a drive thing again, but it would be like a superpower to be fully
Yeah.
able to be fully present with somebody, in terms of being able to form real relationships and enjoy life and not become depressed and angry and bitter as you get older.
About that third system, the threat system. You're using Gilbert's model here.
Yeah, yeah.
Flesh it out. Yeah.
I feel like we have, especially in acceptance and commitment therapy, which you and I are both very committed to, very strongly covered that. And
Mhm.
the fact that people are driven a lot to avoid feeling afraid or being rejected. And we do a lot to control our feelings with drinking and, procrastinating and telling people off. A lot of this is about us trying to make ourselves feel better. So that's another system entirely. So experiential avoidance is the formal name for that idea that we are driven to avoid negative experience. And this often causes us harm. Then almost every clinical disorder you can think of has at its root experiential avoidance. Like social anxiety is avoidance of social situations because you don't want to be evaluated negatively. But then you get more social anxiety. So that's a powerful force. But I see this drive and attachment as a bookend to that, as another perhaps understudied powerful force that can cause, I think, much more social destruction. So experiential avoidance, the withdrawing, not going out, not going socializing, procrastinating, not doing things, harms you. But when you have a drive to be we're the best, we're the strongest group. Your group is weak, our group is strong. You guys are stupid, we're smart. When you have that drive at the individual and the social level to be better, superior, dominate, um, anger, hatred, that is much more destructive to the social fabric than somebody who's experientially avoidant, withdrawing, hiding, not coming out, not living up to their full expectation. Both of them are bad. But I just
Yeah.
think that the drive system, the disorders of the drive system and attachment have been given a pass because we're a materialistic society and drive is often associated with really good things like success that everybody wants.
Yeah.
We get all these podcasts on people on how to get rich and, getting up at 6 in the morning and work till night. And
Yeah.
you can be massively successful and wealthy. Everything reinforces drive.
Mhm.
We don't see the downsides of it as much as experience avoidance. So the
Yeah.
first
Yeah,
thing,
we're
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say we kind of look down on avoidance,
Yeah,
I think culturally, and then we praise drive.
yeah,
And not only does drive impact our culture, our, bigger systems, but it impacts smaller systems like families and
yeah,
classrooms and teams, sports teams, and work teams, like smaller ones too, because if there's one person that is trying to get at the top, and I always use that example of the Stephen Covey's ladder,
Yeah.
the 7 habits of highly successful
Yeah.
people. And he talks about, you have to pay attention to what wall your ladder is against before you start climbing. And I'm like, you have to pay attention to who you are stepping on
Exactly.
before you start climbing that ladder. So it's not just about climbing the ladder against the right wall,
Yeah.
because that's sort of the drive system. It's also like, what is the impact of this climbing?
Yeah.
And when I'm trying to get my approval, what's happening to other people?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
the thing that makes it really complicated is, like, I think it's in the objective world, striving to be better than others and have status and improve is a good thing generally. But with experiential attachment, this is a special kind of attachment, which is attachment to ideas. It's closer to the Buddhist notion of delusion. And it's where there is no ladder and there is no wall, but you're still climbing and stepping on people. So it's the kind of, like, if I were to
yeah.
be envious of you and try and put you down because you're getting more fame than me, like, that would be an example of experiential attachment, because in no way would that actually improve my real world status or make me a better
Yeah.
person or improve my skill. So there would be, even though it would feel like I was on a ladder climbing over you, it would be the world of attachment in the world of delusion.
But can I ask you a question about that real quick?
Sure.
About us, since you brought it up. So you gave me your slides to look at, and I took the best slide. You
Yeah.
had one, you had two, and those are the two best slides.
Yeah.
So you had two really good slides. Your slides were pretty good.
They're a little wordy sometimes. I know.
Yeah, you could use a little editing, but you had two really good slides. And one of them was about it's usual to be unusual.
Yeah.
And you had great stats up there about personality tests and how actually we are more abnormal than average.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you had really good stats. And then the next slide, you had a finger that was pointing at Australia.
Yeah.
And it was like, when it said, last normal person found here in
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
like little tiny corner of Australia. And it was a fantastic slide. So I asked you, this is so great. Can I use my slide? Can I use some of your slides in my presentation? And you are so non-attached. You were like, sure, just take it.
Yeah.
Now, I did give you credit after credit after credit. And I didn't say this was, I came up with the idea. But that's just because I like you and I don't want to steal stuff. But I could see people taking advantage of that.
They will, and they do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They
So what do you do about that when you give your stuff freely? And this is sort of an ACT issue, right? Like the ACT has always been given, things are always given freely. When you give your stuff freely, but people take advantage of it and they use it for their own
Yeah.
striving, or they use it to promote themselves and they say it's theirs.
This
I know
is
that's
this is
happened.
the hardest part, and this is where all the stuff you talk
Yeah.
about in terms of wisdom comes in,
Okay.
because so much of our bitterness and our competitiveness is about things that are non-existent. So if somebody were to take that idea and use it, or you using it, for example, how does that possibly subtract from me? I mean, I understand how mentally I would feel like, oh God, now she's getting credit, I'm not getting credit. Like, I could create
Yours
this
is fine.
symbolic narrative of that. But in the
Uh-huh.
physical world, this physical world, how is that subtracting from me? So that's the wisdom to know the difference. Like, you need to know, like, when you're putting things out, people are taking those ideas constantly. I've seen it happen repeatedly where I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
that was from my talk. And I had to let it go. It's like,
Yeah.
because
My client did it with a chat GPT or whatever, stole my stuff and made it into a different podcast. Yeah. I mean, it's
yeah. Oh,
everywhere.
that he actually made it into a podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if he was
Yeah.
directly now, so what I'm saying is to be able to the wisdom to separate the two. If he was
Mhm.
directly competing with you and actually hurt but he wouldn't.
Yeah.
So that's how you. So the
Careful
ladder
of the
and the
scorpion.
climbing, like in basketball, if you're a better 3-point shooter than this person, you're going to get starting time. So I do want you to focus on getting better than others in the actual physical world.
Oh.
That's okay. Competitiveness is okay. I compete. I'm a boxer. I'm going to fight in December. I plan to win. I do want to be better than the other person. But it's the delusional part that we think we always have to be in the spotlight, that by putting other people in the spotlight, we're being subtracted from that. There's a lot of delusion around that because of our ability to create these symbolic narratives in our heads and live inside those narratives. Oh, Diana's getting all the attention and I'm sitting here in Australia and she's with Steve Hayes doing this boot camp and I'm invisible. That's a narrative. Like, in fact, my day-to-day life is not at all harmed by that. But you could see how easy it is to be caught up in that symbolic world and lose sight of the actual physical reality. Most real experience is local anyway. It's going to be me going to Shell Harbor tonight to talk about coaching my son's basketball team. It's going to be very concrete. There's going to be real human beings in the room, and it's going to be important that I hopefully
And you're gonna like it probably. It'll be liking.
well, I want to
Yeah?
be one of the coaches, so hopefully,
Yeah.
so there is real
Yeah.
status, there's real things that have real impact. But me seeing somebody take my ideas of non-attachment, write a whole paper without citing me, kind of sucks. But I don't see how it
Yeah.
really subtracts from me. There was a review paper on psychological flexibility. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was like they basically said psychoflexibility is the central meta process for everything.
Mhm.
And they didn't really cite Steve. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And I was like,
Yeah.
you have to be very non-attached, but it doesn't really take away from Steve, So
Well, I've seen that in him, like, it is wild how non-attached he
yeah,
both of you. I think it just is
he's
bizarre
much
to me
better than
because I'm
me.
not
Yeah.
no, you both of you. It's unusual for me to be in an academic setting and see this behavior. It's
Yeah,
like such
absolutely.
unusual behavior, and, yeah, he just lets people do it. Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't want certifications in ACT. He's like he's terrified of that. He's like, if we start
Yeah.
certifying people in ACT, then we're doomed because then it can't evolve and grow and change." And then at the same time, that non-attachment is in some ways has been what has allowed it to boom because so many people have been able to be in
Yeah,
on it.
it's love.
With so many people all over the world that,
Exactly.
yeah, that are into it and adding to it and creating with it, like,
Yeah, and you
like
know
we
what
can
his quote
try.
is at the bottom of his email is something love is
Yeah.
do you know what the quote is? I can't quite it's about love.
Love isn't, love isn't everything, it's the only thing or something
Yeah.
like that. Either one way or the other.
It
Love
is
love is the
love
only thing.
because
Yeah.
basically, yeah, you want to, but he has to compete. He has to compete for grant money. He still has to compete for
Yeah.
his business has to compete with other businesses. So there is a reality, but you don't get caught up in the delusion of this envy, bitterness, and resentment. That is 99% delusion, like doesn't actually impact. If I make you bigger, more famous, better, that's not going to subtract from me. And that's the thing that's easy for me to say and seems really obvious, but I think that people do think it subtracts. People are in this delusion of the zero-sum game that if you have more, I have less. And it's just like such a powerful symbolic narrative. Um,
Mhm.
that and that's I think what causes hate and resentment and bitterness to dominate rather than love.
Mm.
That's one of those attachments. And sometimes you will lose, like if you give stuff away. It has happened in my field. There have been people who then commercialized it and have way more influence than me.
Mhm.
And I have to let that go. It's like, yeah,
Well, that's where I also wonder about the liking versus wanting thing too, because you may want that, but may not necessarily like it.
yeah,
Like like at least for me, there's lots of things that I want and I go after and then I get it and I'm like, I don't like this.
yeah,
Like I like some other things that I have a lot more, just
yeah,
coming home. When I came home from that boot camp, my son, my little one, he's on a school trip. So I missed him. So he left on the
yeah.
school trip. Well, I was coming home and then we'd had that whole text exchange. I was feeling like a terrible mom because I was comparing myself to Joe, who was being a really good teenage dad. Well, I was off working, you know. Anyway, but I came home and my son, my little 11-year-old, he left me Post-it notes all over the house. So I opened up
Aw.
my cupboard to put some earrings on, and he left me a little Post-it note in my cupboard where my earrings on. I opened up the toilet lid. It says, "I miss you, mom." I'm
Aw.
such a boy. I go to turn off my light at night, and there's a little Post-it note that says, this is from the one that would write this to you.
Yeah.
He's got good theory of mine. Anyways, I mean, come on.
Wow.
That's love.
That is beautiful.
I mean, I could have all those people in the crowd giving me lots of appreciation, but nothing as good as getting those Post-it notes in the toilet. I mean, that is good stuff.
I do think meaning and love is mostly local. That's what I mean. Like even this idea that how popular am I in Kazakhstan or Russia? You know, how many people cite me in England? I want that. I have a drive to be like, oh, people are reading me in all the different countries. But most of the genuine need satisfaction seems to come from local things. And we have a responsibility to be global as well. But you know what I mean? Letting go of the competitiveness that is just delusion. But I don't have anything against competitiveness that's real, that helps you to improve.
It's a fuzzy line for me. It's a fuzzy line.
Yeah.
But yes. Yeah. So, okay. So back to our beginning, that your genius is love.
I don't know if I'm good at it. I'm saying, yeah.
Genius doesn't mean you're good at it.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
Not that you're bad. It is I have multiple geniuses. You can have many, but mine is emotional sensitivity. It's not that I'm good at it.
Yeah.
It's just I have emotional sensitivity. Like I pick up on emotional stuff, and then persistence. Like I will persist to a halt. So it's that energy can be used in ways that bring you vitality and that are, when you direct it with your values. And you don't get caught up in delusion or don't get caught up in attachment or in avoidance or in a story, then it can be used really wisely. But that same energy, if your energy or your genius is in love, like about love and connection, that could get misdirected. Right. So like the yearnings.
Well, it could be,
so
could you imagine if that's my genius, then if it's misdirected and it's, let's say love isn't returned, and instead it becomes converted to bitterness and resentment and rumination. So it would be equally powerful the other way, like the more power of the sun, the more power of the black hole, I guess, you know what I mean? Like, so that's a good way to put it, that actual thing that might be a strength could become the biggest weakness.
Right. Think about emotional sensitivity.
Yeah.
Right. That can be a real weakness. It can really take you down if you're like sensitive to everybody else's stuff, or you're, take everything really personally. So not that happens to me, but all the time. So given all of that, why don't we close out with, I don't know, how I don't know, a tool, a thing for people to practice unconditional love. Give us something.
That's interesting. I don't do gratitude stuff. So I can't speak to it, but it seems like one of those things that might be able to be like that. I think.
Don't give me something you don't do, Joe.
Okay, well, I think giving away.
Do.
Okay, I know what I do. I know what I do.
Okay.
Giving stuff away and promoting others.
Yeah, you do that.
So that's giving. So that's my version of giving. Yeah. So if I see a father their son is playing basketball, and sometimes he needs to hear something from me, like positive about his son. He wants to see me put my hand on his son's shoulder after he missed a shot and have a private word with him. I know when I'm coaching, if your son comes off, the parent's not looking at the game; they're all looking at you.
Yeah.
And so I would say giving without expecting anything in return would be one of the best practices for non-attachment. And stuff will be returned to you. It will. So it's not, totally selfless.
But you can't be attached to it. Yeah.
Can't expect it. Yeah.
You might get in the lounge at the airport.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, Joe. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I've experienced that a lot from you. Thank you for your 2 slides.
Okay.
They were a real big hit.
No worries.
They were like the best of the whole slideshow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. And you've given a lot to me, and I've given a lot to a lot of people. And then good luck tonight with that basketball coaching.
Yes.
Grants.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who wouldn't want you as their kid's coach? I mean,
I think
a positive psychologist as your kid's coach? I mean, come on.
Yeah. I need to know a little bit more about basketball, but other than that, I'm positive.
Yeah, you got like 1 more year before that matters. When he's like 16, 17, then they'll be like, no, sorry.
Your plays aren't good enough. Yeah.
Yeah, but 15 you can still sneak in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Effort Podcast. Wise Effort is about you taking your energy and putting it in the places that matter most to you. And when you do so, you'll get to savor the good of your life along the way. If you would like to become a member of the Wise Effort Podcast, go to wiseeffort.com. And if you like this episode and think it would be helpful to somebody, please leave a review over at Podchaser. I would like to thank my team, my partner in all things, including the producer of this podcast, Craig, Ashley Hyatt, the podcast manager, and thank you to Ben Gold at Bell and Branch for our music. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and it's not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatments.